When everything feels urgent, nothing feels understandable. You scroll, you read, you listen, and somehow you're more confused than when you started. You're not uninformed. You're overexposed to narratives without context, conflict without clarity, and conversations designed to make you choose a side before you even understand the issue. This show isn't about telling you what to think. It's about slowing down the noise just long enough to ask better questions. I'm Quiver-Arnold, and this is Context, Not Chaos. If facts were enough, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be talking polarization, mistrust, or communication breakdowns. But knowing something doesn't automatically mean accepting it, and accepting it doesn't automatically mean integrating it, especially when doing so risks belonging. Today, we're talking about how people actually change, not in theory, but in real life, and why understanding this matters for science, civic life, and our relationships. Let's slow this down. There's a common assumption in public communication or mass media that people encounter information as rational, independent thinkers, when in reality, people encounter information socially, right? We ask questions like, what will this say about me? Or who will I disappoint if I accept this? Who will I lose? Changing your mind often comes with a social risk, and when the cost of being wrong feels like isolation, certainty almost always becomes protective. Belonging doesn't just shape opinions, it shapes perception. Now, information that aligns with group norms oftentimes feels safer, clearer, and more trustworthy. But information that challenges those norms feels threatening, even if it's accurate. And that's why correcting people publicly often backfires, because correction feels like exposure, and exposure feels like rejection, and rejection shuts down learning. Now, to understand what actually creates openness, I spoke with one of the most open and understanding people in my life, a friend of mine who goes by the name of Joseph Strode. Now, I want to prepare you for what you're about to hear, because we go into things like persuasion and emotional contagion, but we also get pretty emotional, which I think is key if we're to create an open space and be willing to hear new information. Here's part of that conversation. I want to, first of all, thank you for agreeing to come on here, because something that I say in your introduction is that you are someone who I feel and have felt incredibly open and authentic with, almost to a fault, because oftentimes I think I hate the level of comfortability and with my emotions that I have with you. But I want to start by saying thank you, because I do really appreciate you willing to have this conversation.
Yeah, of course.
Now, what we're talking about today is trust, whether it's at the institutional level, whether it's at the personal level. And although you're not a communication researcher, you are someone who I believe has a lot of insight into how people work, specifically how our emotions play a role in almost every interaction. So I want to start with this idea in communication science that in public communication or mass communication, however you want to call it, people encounter information as rational, independent thinkers, right? It seems pretty straightforward. Like
Mhm.
when you think about it, and most people would assume, like, yeah, we all have agency, we have understanding of complex ideas. But from a social science standpoint, oftentimes the reason it's a misconception or even just an assumption is because people encounter information socially through whatever lens we're a part of, meaning whatever group we're a part of, how they see the world. Oftentimes that impacts how we take in the information and what we're willing to hear. So
Mhm.
I guess I'm curious to hear your take on that idea.
Mhm. I think that I can understand why that original idea that people interpret information from like an independent, rational place
Hmm.
has been generally disproven and is not commonly accepted.
Hmm.
And I think that what we're figuring out is humans are far less rational than we originally thought, or than we like to think. I
Yeah.
think, I think there's an assumption, particularly in the West, that we walk around like big brains and that our brains are able to are in control and our mind is the thing that navigates or that determines how we respond.
Yeah. You
And
say that
so
with a rather wide grin. Are you thinking of a specific example?
mm, well, I just think it's the work that's been meaningful in my life has been uncovering just how relevant emotion is to my own quality of life.
Yeah. And so I think the second part to that question almost is this common phrase that I heard in the very beginning of my communication education, interpretation precedes experience. And that's something that so many of my professors throughout my undergrad would say in different courses, right? And essentially what it gets at is the idea, similarly to what you're saying, when we look at social interaction, oftentimes our prejudice or assumptions about a group, a person, a culture clouds what we're actually willing to understand about them. That's essentially what that phrase gets at. And
Mhm.
so I think going to what you're saying about, I guess, going against social norms, would you say that interpretation precedes experience is maybe an accurate description of how we take in information?
Man, what an idea.
I know.
I'm gonna take a breath and really sit with what you said. Hmm.
That's something that I've always really appreciated about you is that
Hmm.
you're more than willing to take a moment and
Mhm.
really sit with what you're hearing or understanding. And you do this all the time. Um, and so I don't know, I really like that you do that. What are you thinking about right now?
I'm trying to calm myself.
Why is that?
Mm. I've learned that the best way to navigate conversation, particularly in areas that are challenging, is to try to calm myself as opposed to think about the answer actively, and trust that something will come up.
But is that almost like a level of distrust in yourself?
It's me challenging the perspective that myself is where the thoughts come from.
Yeah.
I think that it has less to do with me trying to think it through and more to do with thoughts appearing and me observing them.
I haven't heard that before, that perspective at least. And I appreciate you saying it, because I want to point out a lot of what we're talking about
Yes.
is not in your wheelhouse. You know, you're studying psychology, you're looking at human interaction from a different angle as opposed to how communication scholars and researchers look at it and how I look at it.
Mhm.
And so I really commend you because I do think you have incredible insight to offer. But it can be challenging if this isn't your forte, you know.
Mhm.
Something
Absolutely.
else I want to bring up. Stony Brook University did a study several years ago. I want to say around 2016. And this study, this information was introduced to me by a communication researcher of the name of Vanessa Van Edwards, who she studies nonverbal communication and body language and gestures. That's her specialty. What they found was that essentially emotions are contagious, meaning how I'm feeling can ultimately affect or infect you with a similar, if not the same emotion. And she thought that was so mind-boggling, right? That's not what I'm going to ask you about. But What I am going to ask you about, from that study, she decided to do her own kind of research, right? Looking at the three different ways we can infect other people. She believes that people can be infected verbally, non-verbally, and emotionally. Okay.
Hmm.
And so something that she did, I want to focus on the nonverbal portion.
Hmm.
Something that she did was she went, believe it was in Portland, Oregon. She went to this random city and she stepped outside. And she did this over a span of like a full day, right? She stands outside and she just looks up and she's just staring at the sky. Mind you, there's nothing there, right? But she's standing there looking into the sky. At one point, she'll put her hand up above her eyebrows and kind of look around to like pretend like she's looking for something. And over time, and she, of course, filmed all of this, over time, more and more people would join her in a crowd outside, all doing the same exact thing, looking up at nothing. But there was one woman, an older woman, who stayed there from start to finish. And finally, after so long, the woman leans over to Vanessa and she goes, "Is he gonna jump?" And mind you, nothing there. All she did was stand out there and look. And because there was this almost, like you were mentioning earlier, herd mentality, people were like, oh, you must be looking at something interesting. I will look at it too. And I think there's a level of social trust when we're joining a group like that or a person like Vanessa who we're trusting she's looking at something and it's going to be interesting. At least that's how I take it. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Hmm. So, how do we impact someone else's decision making? I fundamentally believe that that is an emotional conversation before it's an intellectual conversation. And when I heard you share the story, what I thought would be a really beautiful like ending to it was the old lady just saying something like, "Gosh, the clouds are beautiful," you know, and then it turns into it goes from this like, this is she like in on the joke? Is
Yeah.
she like does she know what's going on? Why is she still here too?
Yeah.
Gosh, she's just like enjoying herself.
And then it takes this like almost morose
Yeah,
shift.
yeah,
Like,
right.
oh,
What a
he's gonna
comment.
jump.
Uh-huh. But like, way to like say the perfect thing to like, almost the perfect type of humor in that moment. That would be
Yeah.
once they've established that literally, and at a certain point, this lady's like realizing, oh, there's nothing going on here. This person's just staring at the sky.
She has to. Like,
Uh-huh.
oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah. And especially if she makes a comment like that, she's socially aware enough to realize, right? She's like,
To your point, yeah, like that portion of Vanessa's study, which of course is separate from the initial one, but that portion of her study basically was proving that emotions are contagious enough to impact someone else's decision, right?
mhm,
Every individual who decided to stop and look into the sky throughout the how 12 hours or so that she was out there, they were doing it because they believed she was looking at something and they wanted to know too.
mhm.
Something else that I think you might find interesting.
Well, could I jump in on that real quick?
Yeah, please. Oh my gosh.
Um, I think the reason why the old lady would look up at the sky would be probably pretty different than the reason a person looks quickly, sees that there's nothing, and then walks away.
And I
Uh,
think to that same point, thinking about the background information behind someone's life and how that plays a role in whether or not they're willing to spend the time out of their day to look into the sky at essentially nothing. I think that's a good point.
yeah, what I think I hear you saying is I would imagine myself in that situation, and I'm walking past, and I see someone looking up at the sky, and the first thing I think is something going to hit me? Is some event going on that I need to be concerned about?
Yeah, which
More
may
likely,
be
yeah.
some like separate trauma, but we don't have to get into that right
Well,
now.
I think that to me, it's actually like evolutionarily ingrained in us. If
Yeah.
we see someone like that's close enough to us in the sense that we can trust that they're not going to attack us, they're like in some way they're in our in group. It's pretty separated because we don't know this person deeply or personally, but we know like we accept them as a safe enough person to be around us without concern. We see them concerned about something and or interested in something, and so we have our interest be pulled in that direction. I think out of an evolutionary instinct to remain safe.
Same word, different language.
Say more different language.
Yeah, that's
Are
what
you
I think.
asking me to do that?
No, I no, I'm not asking you to whip out some German right now,
Yeah,
Joseph.
okay.
Now, the next thing I want to get a touch on with you is
Yeah.
this idea of belonging as a cognitive filter, because it's something I talk about, especially in this episode. But essentially, belonging doesn't just shape opinions, right? But more so perception. And
Mhm.
so thinking about how oftentimes information that aligns with our group agreement or social norms feels safer as opposed to something that goes against that. I'm curious to hear your take on when it comes to taking in information with my societal preconceived
Interpretation.
notions, filtering it, what, I don't know, is it harder or easier to establish trust in that way?
I guess the question I hear is what would make it easier to establish trust?
Yeah.
Because in a lot of ways we are a product of our social context,
Hmm.
particularly when we try to understand safety and when we're having a conversation about changing minds or influencing other people. To start that conversation is considering what is this person's threat level? How are they feeling? Where's their nervous system at? By considering that I'm talking to an individual who cares mostly about feeling safe and seen. So
Yeah.
if you don't start from the layer of am I talk like is the person I'm talking to feeling safe, then any sort of impact that you want to have to their deeper cognitive belief structure is it's unreachable until the answer to the question is yes, they feel safe enough to genuinely hear what I'm saying.
And something I teach my students now is the idea of influencing a group, a culture, people. Because when I think about journalism, it's the idea of dispensing information in a way that's digestible, but that people are willing to accept, right? About any topic. And so thinking about making people feel safe, I think is synonymous with the idea of building trust. Also,
Mhm,
I think meeting people where they're at,
mhm,
understanding that something I spoke about with Dr. Day last week was when it comes to explaining research findings to people, recognizing that not everyone has the same reading level, not everyone has the same socioeconomic background, not everyone has the same education level, right?
mhm.
And so I think that plays a huge role in not only meeting people where they're at, but also establishing trust. Because how is someone supposed to trust me if I don't recognize they may have certain limitations that prevent them from understanding what I'm trying to tell them?
I'm going to ask you the question.
Yeah, please.
So before we continue,
Hmm.
I'd like to know how you're doing.
Oh God. Um, I'm okay. Um, as I think, I don't remember if I talked to you about this, but there was a lot of backlash to me taking on
Mhm.
this PR client a couple months ago, and that resulted in strained relationships with my direct colleagues. Some of whom I have had a long relationship with, like more than 5 years. Um, I don't know. I right before this interview, I saw someone who knows all the people that I'm not no longer speaking with, and I hadn't seen him. He was my first cameraman in like 2019. And we ran into each other when I was leaving lunch, and I was like, "Hey," and he knows all the people I'm talking about, and so I explained to him what had happened, and I hadn't seen him in years, but I explained to him everything that happened, and I kind of got his perspective, and he essentially just told me, like they're good people, and I would hate for your relationships to not bounce back because you guys have known each other for so long and because you have such a long-standing relationship. And I don't know, that's had me thinking because I keep telling people I'm okay, and I keep telling people that um, I can take it. I'm totally fine with the strained relationship. I don't work directly with them,
Mhm,
and I don't answer to them. And I keep telling people that, and it's true, but at the same time, it is really shitty
mhm,
because I would love for things to be okay. And I'm someone who, regardless of political beliefs or background or status, I can work with anyone. And the outside information doesn't affect my relationship with them, my working relationship with them. But that hasn't been the case for me over the past couple years. And it's almost a matter of I wish someone could be as good of a friend as I am to me, you know? Um, and so I am okay, but I found myself, especially today, thinking a lot about that and whether or not I want to invest in that relationship any longer because it's not being reciprocated,
Hmm.
which is always tough. I'm
Yeah.
starting to tear up.
I I guess I just hear you caring about these people.
I do. I care a lot about them. And
Hmm.
it's tough when it's not so much that the care doesn't seem reciprocated, but more so the respect or understanding isn't being
Hmm.
reciprocated. Because you're someone who I would argue is not only incredibly intuitive, but emotionally regulated.
Yeah.
And I think that is a testament to not only your lived experience, but also your maybe threshold for pain.
Hmm.
Something I believe is that pain is the one common denominator in most people's lives. And
Hmm.
so when it comes to meeting people where they're at, I think a good portion of that includes understanding pain and how it rears its head in different ways. And I really respect that about you.
Thank you. I I'm absolutely in a place in my life where I feel confused about why I am the way I am.
Why is that? Why are you
Um,
confused?
to hear you say like that you perceive me as someone who's generally emotionally regulated and calm. Whether I know it or whether I agree with you, I'm not sure.
Hmm.
But I guess I just find myself reflecting on what it's meant for me to be emotionally calm in the past.
Hmm.
Um, and while there may have been fruit that bears in how I can remain calm in conversation, the what feels like an unfortunate truth is that is a coping mechanism that I've developed because I haven't had the space to be emotional in the past. This has been a big part of my journey recently, is uncovering the ways that I've been required to limit my own emotional expression so that others around me can express theirs.
Is that not incredibly, if not lonely, diminishing?
I mean, it has to be one of the hardest things I've ever experienced, um, to not feel safe enough to be seen. Yeah, it's super lonely.
I'm sorry. I think I've never shared this really with anyone, and for the sake of my own sanity, I won't go into too much detail, but for maybe 10 years, um, I had an incredibly strained relationship with a family member, and I found myself for a long time only able to focus on how they were feeling and their emotions and their willingness to accept certain situations, maybe so much so that I found myself almost putting myself down so
Hmm.
that they could be comfortable.
Hmm.
Um, and then I had almost this realization a few months ago, actually, that all of that work for so many years and all of the pain I put myself through was almost all for naught because ultimately their understanding, their willingness to accept whatever um, wasn't changing anytime soon. And then I felt really dumb
Oh.
because I was like, what did I do that for? If there
Mm.
was no beneficial outcome for anyone involved, why did I put myself through that? Why did I allow that behavior to continue? Um,
Now that you've come to that understanding
mhm,
and you see that you diminishing or reducing yourself so that another person can feel more or another person can have their space to feel
mhm,
didn't lead to the outcome you were hoping. which is them changing their behavior, what would you do differently?
That's a loaded question because part of the reason why I did everything I had done for so long was because it was also beneficial to another family member who I care about a lot. And I would be an absolute wreck if our relationship was strained in any way. And so looking back, like in hindsight,
Hmm.
thinking about who I am and who I've been in my career, professionally, personally, I it would be very, very easy for me to accept absolutely no bullshit, to be myself authentically and do what it is that I do. At the same time, I recognize would I have done that or had done that, it would have been at immense pain and risk to the relationship with my mother, um,
Hmm.
which I don't think I would be able to live without. So I really don't know if I would do anything differently.
Have you shared that with your mom?
I haven't because I don't know if she's ready to hear that. And
Hmm.
she's a woman who's incredibly in tune with her emotions. She's incredibly self-aware. Um, but at the same time, she's a human too. And it's her first time living. And she's already been put through so much when it comes to my relationship with this other individual that I don't know if this is the cherry that needs to be put on top.
It's hurt me in the past quite severely to not feel safe to be seen by my mom.
Mm.
I think a significant amount of my trauma comes from that.
And so, do you think you would do anything differently, looking back on your experiences and the way that maybe a lack of understanding or a lack of recognition made you feel? Do you think you
Mhm.
would change anything that you've done?
I am changing.
Really?
I'm changing how I'm doing it. I learned a lesson really early in my life that my security was intimately related to my mom's well-being, emotional well-being. And the process of learning that meant that anytime there would be an emotionally strained situation, she would be unable to create space for me to explore the strain of that situation because her nervous system was so impacted by anything that would happen, particularly if there was conflict,
Mm.
interpersonal conflict. So whether it be something that I struggled with or something a sibling struggled with, it would be very quickly interpreted as her doing something wrong. People would call it a victim mentality.
Yeah.
And the lesson I learned at a young age from that is if I wanted to be cared for, I needed to care for my mom before I showed myself.
Sounds like a lot to put on an individual, let alone maybe a child.
I'm still trying to learn more about what or how that's impacted me. I think it is a lot.
I think this is an amazing segue to the final topic I want to talk to you about, being openness.
Hmm.
Um, whether it's willingness to share information, willingness to receive information.
Hmm.
Um, one thing I'm curious about is what do you believe creates that level of openness, either from the receiving or giving end of information?
If I had to narrow it down to one thing, I think, and it's almost counterintuitive, the most important thing that impacts someone's openness to receive is a feeling that no matter how they receive the information, the other person will still accept them, which begs the question, what does it mean to try to change another person's mind?
When we think about changing someone else's mind, right, a level of persuasion is needs to be brought up, right? Because I think the act of changing someone's idea or mindset is associated with persuasion. So something I do want to ask you is, and you may not have an answer to this, but what do you think people get wrong about persuasion?
I think the thing that people get wrong is that they believe they have control over what someone else thinks if they say something the right way.
Can you expand on that?
The closest I can get to solidifying whether someone else will appropriately interpret what I'm trying to say is if that person is feeling safe. There are ways that we can approach conversation that allows someone else to feel safe. And typically that's not the advice that's being given when someone is trying to teach someone else how to be persuasive. What even, Quanta, to you, what does it mean to be persuasive?
I relate it to the idea of influence, right? One, I think it means a level of human understanding,
Hmm.
whether it's from a social perspective or an economic perspective or a cultural perspective, understanding where people are coming from so that you know where to meet them and where to take them, right?
Hmm.
How to guide them through a topic, how to guide them through a conversation. A great example is our salespeople. The best salespeople in any industry know how to look for tells, right? They know how to recognize when someone they're losing someone in their act of persuading. Um,
Hmm.
and I think it takes a great level of human understanding. I think that's, to me, the key part in persuasion is being able to understand what to say based on where people have been in their past.
Hmm. I think what I've come to understand is the most effective salesperson isn't trying to get you to buy.
Yeah,
They're
absolutely. What I mean by that, and I'll give a specific example. There is a film, and I forget the name of the film. It might be Fly Me to the Moon with Scarlett Johansson and Channing Tatum, and it's on Apple TV. There's a scene towards the beginning of that movie, and in this movie, Scarlett Johansson plays a very successful female business, a saleswoman. And she, because this film is set in the 50s, I believe, she's almost one of the first of her kind, right? She's incredibly talented, and she relies heavily on tapping into human and social understanding. One example of that is there's a scene in the movie where she is trying to get several gentlemen to purchase a car. And she shows up, she walks into the boardroom like she owns the place, and she has, at the time, we didn't know this, but later you find out it's a fake baby bump. She's pretending to be pregnant. She has her hand on her back as she's walking. She's leaning backwards, and she has the other hand on the tummy. And then she has her secretary behind her, right? And she's explaining like all these things, like, oh, I need this, blah, blah, blah. And the gentlemen are acting confused because, again, for the time period, it was strange for her to walk into the boardroom that way. And they're like, oh, you must be lost, blah, blah, blah. And then she goes, no, 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 I'm like, this is my meeting, right? And she goes through the whole meeting talking about their wives and how lucky or how happy their wives would be if their husbands had a car like the one that she's selling, one with seatbelts, which was revolutionary at the time, one with 800 horsepower, right? Fast enough to get them home in time for dinner after work, one with room for the kids and car seats in the back, but still had the level of horsepower that they were wanting to have. Again, tapping into the shared understanding of the time that family was above all importance. And
Mhm.
so I think the reason I think of that example in particular is because, again, it tying into the salesperson example and tying back into persuasion, right? And the importance and what persuasion is. Ultimately, it's understanding where people have been and what's important to them. Because in that moment, once you understand what's important to them, you know where to take them next that can most likely get them to say yes to whatever it is you're selling or asking or wanting them to do.
And I think that that last thing that you said, whatever it is you're selling or saying or wanting them to do, I wouldn't make a good salesman. because my entire goal is to recognize that I have an inherent, an internal, and an unshaking or unwavering capacity for peace despite my external environment.
I hate to say it, but I do agree. I don't think you'd make a very good salesman.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, if it was really my goal, I think I could, but I just don't know if I could get myself to care enough.
And you're much too like crown chakra, down to the
Uh-huh.
earth, I think you're much more invested in developing someone's human and emotional capabilities as opposed to the external
Yeah,
gratitude.
increasing their material presence.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Joseph, I want to thank you,
Mm,
not only for, agreeing to have this conversation, but also being someone that is, I would argue, easy to talk to, but at the same time, so willing to understand,
mm,
which I think is not as common, especially now, where some people can be great listeners, some people can be great talkers, but it's very, at least in my experience, unique to find someone that's willing to not only hear what you have to say, not only listen to what you have to say, but also understand where it's coming from.
mm.
So I want to say thank you.
Yeah, I mean you're important to me, Q, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to sit with you and talk. And I know that there's going to be a podcast about some of the things we brought up today. And I mean, I hope you can piece something together.
I guess we'll see. I think it'll
Uh,
be fun though.
yeah.
Research and lived experience point to the same things. People stay open when they feel a number of things: respected, safe, heard, unashamed. Because curiosity is a social signal. What it does is it says you belong here even while we're figuring this out. And that signal matters more than the strength of your argument. Here's a simple reframing practice I want you to try. When conversations stall or start to fizzle out, shift the goal from "I need to convince you" to "I want to understand how you're making sense of this." Now, I want to be clear that does not mean abandoning truth, but instead it creates conditions where truth has somewhere to land. Before you log off, let's take one moment to bring this back to the human scale. Not the debate, not the conclusion, just one question to carry with you. Today's question is this: where might understanding come easier if I prioritized relationship over resolution? I want you to notice how safety changes what becomes possible. I'm Quiver-Arnold. This has been Context, Not Chaos, and we'll pick this back up next time.